Picture this. It is a rainy fall evening.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, just a classic dramatic setup. You are in this picturesque waterfront town, St. Michael's, Maryland,
Right.
and you are sitting in a room with 30 rising stars. These are people who are on the absolute fast track to becoming chief executives.
So high stakes. These are the heavy hitters of tomorrow.
Exactly. And the atmosphere in this room is just thick with anticipation because the guest speaker for the evening is a legend.
Oh, I know who you mean.
Right. He runs one of the world's largest, most successful tech companies. So the moderator steps up and asks him one single, seemingly straightforward question.
Just one question.
Just one. He asks, what does a CEO really do?
It sounds like the setup to a business school joke, honestly.
It really does. But it is actually the inciting incident for one of the most exhaustive studies on leadership ever conducted.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
So the tech CEO gives his answer. He does not even hesitate, He just lays out 3 specific, non-negotiable roles that a chief executive simply has to play.
And he expands on them with just total conviction.
Bro, absolutely. Yeah. The people in the room are taking furious notes. The veil has been lifted. The ultimate playbook has been revealed.
They probably went to sleep that night feeling completely enlightened.
Right up until the sun comes up.
Yeah, morning 2 changes everything.
Because the next morning, the second speaker arrives. And this time, it is the leader of a massive multinational financial services company.
A totally different industry.
Totally different. She sits down, and the moderator asks her the exact same question. What does a CEO really do?
And let me guess, her answer is a little different.
It is not just slightly tweaked. She lists 3 primary roles that are categorically entirely different from the tech CEO's list.
Completely different priorities. I mean, a different lens on the whole organization.
Yeah, a completely different framework for where the leader should spend their time.
That has to be confusing for the audience.
And if that was not enough to induce whiplash, that evening, a third speaker takes the stage.
Oh, man. Here we go.
The head of a prestigious academic medical center. He is asked the exact same question. And he presents yet another completely distinct list of the 3 most important aspects of the job.
So you have 3 master navigators of the global economy.
Yeah.
And if you look at their compasses, they are pointing in 3 completely different directions.
Exactly. If you are one of those 30 rising executives in that room, it is an incredibly unsettling moment.
Well, or if you are the researcher sitting in the back observing this, I mean, it creates a massive crisis of methodology.
Because we all want to believe that at the absolute pinnacle of success, there is a unified, universally understood true north, right? Like a secret rule book.
But if the absolute best leaders in the world cannot even agree on the fundamental definition of the job, how on earth do you study success?
It makes it seem like everyone is just winging it,
Yeah.
Just getting lucky or surviving on sheer charisma.
And we know that cannot be true. The data firmly rejects the idea that top-tier leadership is just random luck.
Right. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are going on a mission to solve the mystery of that rainy retreat in Maryland.
It is such a good mystery to unpack.
We are extracting the ultimate data-backed playbook for excellence from the top echelon of global leadership. We are drawing on a mountain of research.
An exhaustive study, really.
Yeah, a study that looked at over 2,400 public company CEOs to find out what actually separates the absolute best from everyone else.
And we are going to unpack the underlying logic of their success. Because what the researchers discovered is that the secret is not in their daily to-do list.
Right, it's not about waking up at 4 in the morning.
Exactly. It is in their cognitive frameworks, how they actually think.
Now, I want to say something directly to you, the listener. You might be sitting there thinking, well, I do not run a multinational bank.
Right, I manage a team of 5 people.
Or, I'm just navigating my own freelance career. Why do I care about a Fortune 500 CEO?
Do not tune out.
Please do not. The scale we are talking about today is corporate, yes, but the mechanics of making complex decisions, avoiding information overload, and getting groups of humans to do impossible things.
That is universal.
It is a masterclass you can apply to any aspect of your life.
The human psychology at play here is just universal. I mean, the biases that sink a multi-billion-dollar company are the exact same cognitive biases that trap us as individuals.
So before we look at the specific mindsets these leaders use, I want to understand the stakes. Because the researchers who witnessed that confusion in Maryland did not just throw their hands up and walk away.
No, they dug right into the data.
Right. Why is the person sitting in that top chair so critical?
Well, the stakes are just astronomical. The researchers point out something called the CEO effect.
The CEO effect.
Yeah, this is the measurable, isolated impact that a top leader has on a company's performance, completely independent of the industry or the overall economy.
Wow. And that effect is growing.
It has more than doubled since the mid-20th century.
So the individual calling the shots matters more now than ever before.
Exponentially more. I mean, let us look at the financial divergence.
Okay, lay the numbers on me.
The top 20% of CEOs, so the highest quintile, generate, on average, 2.8 times more total return to shareholders during their tenure than the average performers.
2.8 times. Okay, give me a tangible sense of what that actually looks like for a normal person investing.
Okay, imagine you take $1,000 and invest it in an index fund.
Standard safe debt.
Right. Over a typical 10-year period, growing at historical averages under just an average CEO, your money grows to just under $1,600.
Okay, a solid, modest return. I made $600. I am not complaining about $600.
You should not. But imagine you invest that exact same $1,000 across a portfolio of companies led exclusively by that top quintile of CEOs.
Okay, so the absolute best of the best.
Right. You do not get $1,600. Your $1,000 grows to more than $10,000.
Wait, whoa. A difference of $8,400 on a $1,000 bet.
Yeah.
Just based entirely on the human being calling the shots at the top.
That is the staggering reality of the CEO effect.
Yeah.
It is a massive divergence in value creation.
That is unbelievable.
And it happens in an environment that is becoming increasingly hostile, too.
Yeah, the source material paints a pretty bleak picture of the modern leadership landscape.
The role is just getting harder by the minute. I mean, you have the relentless pace of digital transformation.
Right.
You have cybersecurity threats that can bankrupt a company overnight.
Yeah.
You have supply chain fragility, environmental demands, and a public square driven by social media.
Where, a single misstep can spark a global outrage cycle in under 2 hours.
Exactly. The pressure cooker is turned up to the maximum setting.
Yeah.
And the turnover data just proves it.
Yeah, the tenure data blew my mind. The average tenure for a top executive in the U.S. dropped from 10 years in the year 2000 to less than 7 years by 2019.
That is a huge drop.
And 30% of Fortune 500 CEOs fail within their first 3 years. That is nearly 1 in 3 crashing and burning.
It is a uniquely isolating job.
There's a quote in the sources from Mary Barra, the chief executive of General Motors, that really drove that isolation home for me.
Oh, about the loneliness.
Yeah, the sudden, unexpected loneliness of the top job. She pointed out that your entire career, as you come through the ranks, you always have a dialogue with your boss.
You always have a backstop.
Exactly. Someone to complain to, someone to ask for permission. And then suddenly, you are the leader. You look over your shoulder and there's no one there.
You are accountable for everything.
Everything.
It is the only role in any organization that is literally peerless. So if we want to extract a playbook from this, we have to look at the people who not only survive that peerless isolation, but generate that 10x return we just talked about.
But how do you actually find them? I mean, if the CEO effect is so powerful, but external factors like the economy also play a role, how do you mathematically isolate the brilliant leaders from the just plain lucky ones?
It requires a ruthless, multi-stage filtration process. The researchers started with a massive initial pool, like over 2,400 individuals who led the 1,000 largest public companies over a 15-year period.
That is a huge data set.
It is, but you cannot just take a snapshot of a good quarter. You need a sustained track record of navigating cycles.
So they set a minimum time in the seat.
Exactly, a minimum of 6 years. If you did not last 6 years, you were simply cut from the data set.
Which dropped the list significantly, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
That makes sense, though. You can write a booming economy or a hot product launch for a year or two, but 6 years means you likely had to deal with a downturn, a crisis, or some major shift in the market.
Now comes the most critical filter, though. The researchers acknowledge that roughly 55% of a company's financial success is dictated by factors entirely outside the leader's control.
55%.
Yeah. Inherited debt, the geographic GDP growth of where they are headquartered, macro industry trends.
It is like two people racing sailboats. If one person has a massive tailwind and the other has a headwind, the person who crosses the finish line first is not necessarily the better sailor.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So, to find the better sailor, you have to mathematically subtract the wind.
How do you do that with a company?
In financial terms, they filtered for something called excess total return to shareholders, or excess TRS.
Okay, break that down for me.
They looked at the leader's performance and stripped away the baseline growth of their specific industry and geography. They isolated the value created over and above what their direct peers managed to do with the exact same win.
Wow. Okay.
And they only kept the leaders in the top 2 quintiles of that excess value creation.
So they're only looking at the margin of victory that the leader actually manufactured themselves.
From there, they cross-referenced the survivors with established ethical and reputation lists.
Oh, that is smart.
Right. They looked at employee sentiment, environmental track records, and corporate governance. They wanted to ensure these were not just ruthless cost cutters who burned the company down to boost a quarterly stock price.
They wanted sustainable excellence.
Precisely.
And after all those filters, they were left with a highly elite group of 146 leaders. But here is a critical detail in the source material. When they looked at those 146 people, they realized they had a massive blind spot.
A huge one.
Mm.
The list was overwhelmingly skewed toward white males and U.S.-centric businesses.
Right.
Only 8% were women, and only 18% were people of color.
Which obviously does not mean that white American men are inherently better at leadership. It just reflects the historical realities of who was handed the keys to those top 1,000 largest companies 15 years ago.
Exactly. To study the actual traits of excellence, you need a diverse data set of operating environments. So the researchers deliberately opened the aperture.
What does that mean in practice?
They looked just below the threshold of the top 1,000 largest companies, still examining massive, complex organizations, but broadening the geographic and demographic scope.
And they applied the exact same ruthless filters. The 6-year tenure, the excess TRS, the ethical bar.
The exact same filters. They
Yeah.
did not lower the bar at all. They just looked in more places.
And they found some incredible transformative figures doing that.
Oh, absolutely.
People like Nancy McKinstry, who took over the Dutch publisher Wolters Kluwer when it was a struggling traditional print business, and she transformed it into a $5 billion digital powerhouse.
Or Lip Bhutan at Cadence Design Systems. He stepped into a completely chaotic, failing situation and multiplied the company's market cap by more than 38 times.
38 times. So by opening that aperture, they added 54 exceptional, diverse leaders, bringing the final data set to a beautifully round 200 of the absolute best chief executives of the 21st century.
And the total value this specific group created is just staggering.
Give me the number.
The researchers estimate that the economic value generated by these 200 individuals in excess of their peers is approximately $5 trillion.
Trillion, with a T.
With a T. That is roughly equivalent to the annual economic output of Japan, which is the world's third largest economy.
Created by the decisions of just 200 people.
Yes.
Okay, I have to stop and push back here.
Go for it.
We started this whole discussion talking about how 3 different leaders had 3 completely different lists of what the job entails, right?
Right.
Now we have a list of 200 incredibly diverse people. They are in different countries, operating in different cultures, facing totally different industries. A tech CEO fighting off startups is not doing the same things on a Tuesday morning as a hospital CEO managing doctors and insurance companies.
True.
Is it not true that looking at these 200 completely different people is like try and find the perfect recipe by asking 200 different chefs? I mean, a Stanford professor is even quoted in our sources saying there are 10 different recipes for success and no single secret recipe.
It is a very valid skepticism. I mean, if you try to study their calendars or their daily habits or the specific software they use, you will find total chaos.
Right.
There is no shared daily recipe. But the researchers realized they were looking at the wrong layer. They needed to stop looking at what these leaders did and start looking at how they thought.
Ah, the operating system underneath the
Yeah.
actions.
Yes, they do not excel at every single aspect of the job, because no human does. But they approach the fundamental tensions of the role with a shared set of cognitive frameworks.
Okay.
They share profound patterns in how they view risk, how they view people, and how they view time.
And that brings us to the first massive pattern in their operating system. If you want to achieve that level of excellence, the foundational mindset is be bold.
Which I know sounds like a motivational poster,
It totally does.
but has a very specific operational meaning. When an average leader looks at a volatile, terrifying world, their instinct is to minimize uncertainty. They play defense.
Which sounds rational. Protect the downside, right?
It sounds rational, but it inevitably leads to slow stagnation. The best leaders embrace the uncertainty. They believe fortune favors the bold. They do not just accept the rules of the industry as they find them, they actually reframe the entire game.
Reframing the game. The source uses a brilliant historical analogy to explain this, referencing the movie Invictus.
Yes.
We were talking about Nelson Mandela and Francois Pienaar, the captain of the South African rugby team, the Springboks, back in 1995.
It is the ultimate masterclass in setting a vision. Just think about the context.
Right.
Apartheid has just ended. The nation is deeply fractured, tense, and on the brink of violence. And Mandela meets with the captain of the national rugby team.
Now, if Mandela were an average leader, what is the vision he sets for that team?
He says, well, we are hosting the World Cup. I want you to practice hard, win your matches, and bring home the trophy.
Right. It is a sports vision. It is safe. It is what everyone expects.
But Mandela did not do that. He did not tell Pienaar to win a rugby tournament. He reframed the game entirely.
The vision he set was about uniting a fractured nation through the shared experience of this team. Winning the tournament was not the ultimate goal. It was just the mechanism for national healing.
By changing the very definition of what winning meant, he unlocked a level of inspiration, pressure, and performance that a simple athletic goal never could have achieved.
We see this exact same dynamic, this radical reframing, in the corporate examples too. Let us look at MasterCard and its former CEO, Ajay Banga.
This is a fascinating story of internal friction.
When Banga took over, MasterCard was doing fine, but they were locked in a bitter, bloody war of attrition.
Right. He was walking through the office and he sees a slogan painted in a stairwell that says, MasterCard, the heart of commerce.
And it hits him how entirely wrong that is.
Because internally, everyone at the company was obsessed with their direct competitors. They spent all their energy fighting Visa and American Express for market share.
But what were they actually fighting over?
They were fighting for a piece of the 15% of global transactions that were conducted electronically.
They were playing a brutally competitive but ultimately tiny game.
Banga realized that the vast majority of global commerce, 85%, was actually conducted in physical cash.
Wow.
So he reframed the vision. He changed the entire corporate mandate to kill cash.
Kill cash. Suddenly, Visa is not the enemy anymore. Cash is the enemy.
It completely changed their strategic aperture. The target was not the 15% anymore, it was the untapped 85%.
Which changes everything.
It changed who they partnered with, what technologies they developed, and how they pitched governments on the security of digital payments.
Reed Hastings at Netflix did the exact same thing. Back in 2002, they were mailing DVDs in red envelopes,
Yeah.
If his vision had been, let us be the absolute best DVD by mail company in the world, where would they be today?
They would be sitting in a corporate graveyard next to Blockbuster.
Right. Blockbuster optimized for their local maximum, which was late fees and physical stores.
But Hastings looked 20 years down the road. His stated vision back then was not about DVDs. It was to build a global entertainment distribution company.
Because he framed the game around the distribution of entertainment, rather than the physical plastic discs, the company was conceptually positioned to abandon their core product.
And lead the streaming revolution when broadband got fast enough.
Exactly. It is also about finding your unique intersection. Hubert Joly at Best Buy provides a great framework for this.
When he took over, Best Buy was hemorrhaging money, losing $1.7 billion.
Yeah, everyone thought Amazon was going to turn them into a showroom and bankrupt them.
And Joly used a four-circle framework to reframe Best Buy's game. To set a bold vision, he looked for the intersection of four things.
Okay.
First, what does the world actually need? Second, what are we uniquely good at? Third, what are we deeply passionate about? And fourth, how can we actually monetize it?
Because if the vision was just selling electronics, Amazon wins on price and convenience every single time. But Joly realized Best Buy was uniquely good at something Amazon could not do, which was human interaction. They were good at helping confused, overwhelmed customers navigate complex technology.
So the vision shifted from selling hardware to enriching lives through technology.
And that shift allowed for radical changes. They stopped viewing vendors like Apple and Samsung as adversaries they needed to squeeze for margin.
Yeah, invited them.
Yeah, they created stores within a store, actually charging the tech giants for the premium floor space. Joly famously called it being the Colosseum where the gladiators fight.
It was a fundamentally different business model born purely from reframing the vision.
But setting the vision is only half the battle, right? A CEO can stand on a stage, unveil a brilliant new slogan, and watch it completely fail to change the company's DNA.
Oh, it happens all the time
Why does that happen?
because of human nature. This brings us to a fascinating piece of behavioral psychology that the researchers highlight. It is an experiment by the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, often referred to as the blank lottery ticket experiment.
Oh, I love this one. Okay, let us set the stage for you listening. Kahneman gets two groups of people. For the first group, he just hands them a standard, pre-printed lottery ticket with a random string of numbers on it.
Right. And for the second group, he gives them a completely blank ticket and a pen. And he tells them to write down their own lucky numbers.
Now, let us pause and think about this rationally. A lottery is pure mathematical chance. The odds of a random string of numbers winning are identically equal to the odds of your personal lucky numbers winning.
Correct.
Therefore, the physical ticket holds the exact same expected financial value regardless of who wrote the numbers.
A purely rational economic actor would value both tickets equally.
But Kahneman waits a few days right before the drawing, and he approaches both groups. He offers to buy the tickets back from them, and the results are completely irrational.
Totally. The people who were handed a random ticket
Yeah.
were willing to sell it back for a relatively low logical price.
Okay.
But the people who wrote down their own numbers, they demanded a massively higher premium.
How much higher? I'm guessing maybe double.
No. They demanded at least 5 times more money to part with the ticket they filled out themselves.
5 times, just because they held the pen.
It reveals a profound truth about our desire for agency. People support what they help create. When you impose a vision on someone, it is a random lottery ticket. They have no emotional attachment to it.
Right.
When they help write the numbers, they value it exponentially more.
The best CEOs understand the lottery ticket effect implicitly. They do not lock themselves in a boardroom, emerge with a tablet of stone, and dictate the vision from the top down. They co-create it.
Maurice Levy, the legendary CEO of the advertising giant Publicis, demonstrated this perfectly. He was in his 70s, preparing for a transition, and he knew this massive legacy holding company needed a radical new vision to survive against nimble tech consultants.
And the natural instinct would be for him, the seasoned veteran, to just write the new strategy and mandate it, right?
Instead, he initiated a massive, months-long co-creation process. He did not just involve his inner circle either. He brought in hundreds of his top leaders from around the world.
Wow.
But more importantly, he brought in 50 young managers, people under the age of 30. He even invited outside provocateurs like Eric Schmidt from Google to challenge their assumptions.
So he locked them in rooms, he forced them to debate, to break into subgroups, to argue, and to actually synthesize their ideas.
What eventually emerged was their new vision, called the Power of One, which involved breaking down all the historic internal silos between their different agencies.
But the brilliance was not just the final slogan. The brilliance was the process. By the time they launched the Power of One, hundreds of the most influential people in the company felt like they had written the lottery ticket.
They owned the vision.
Yeah. So when the incredibly painful work of actually breaking down those silos began, they did not resist it because it was their idea.
And that painful work, the execution, is where the bold mindset really gets tested. Vision without execution is just corporate hallucination.
Right.
Once you co-create the vision, you have to actually make the bold moves to get there.
The researchers analyzed thousands of companies to see what kind of moves actually move the needle. They found that incremental tweaks do virtually nothing. You have to make massive, concentrated moves, and you have to make them early in your tenure.
They categorize these into 5 types.
Right. Yeah. Buying and selling businesses, investing heavily in new areas, driving radical productivity improvements, creating immense differentiation, and dynamically allocating resources.
But the key differentiator of the absolute best leaders is that they do not just make one bold move, pat themselves on the back, and cruise into retirement.
Right.
They orchestrate a continuous series of what the researchers call S-curves.
Okay, explain the S-curve concept. Sounds like something from an economics textbook.
It kind of is. Imagine drawing an S on a graph. The line starts flat as you prepare a new initiative. Then it curves upward sharply. That is the intense period of execution, rapid growth, the painful but exciting transformation.
But it does not go up forever.
No. It eventually reaches the top of the S and flattens out again. The initiative matures. The growth slows down. The company catches its breath and stabilizes.
And if an average leader reaches that flat plateau at the top of the S, they set up camp, they enjoy the margins, they just get complacent.
Exactly. But the best leaders recognize that the flat plateau is where companies go to die. Right as the first S-curve is flattening out, they intentionally launch the next massive, disruptive initiative. They start a new S-curve.
Roberto Setúbal at Itaú Unibanco in Brazil is the perfect case study for this. He was the CEO for 22 years.
22 years in the banking sector is an eternity. The burnout rate is enormous
How on earth did he survive the board in the market for over 2 decades?
because he never let the bank settle into a plateau. He orchestrated 4 distinct, massive S-curves during his tenure. First, he aggressively acquired state-owned banks to transform Ito from a regional player into a nationwide powerhouse.
That is a massive integration effort. Most CEOs would stop right there.
But as soon as that stabilized, he launched the second curve, pivoting hard into corporate and investment banking while expanding across Latin America.
Wow.
Then, the third curve, a complete overhaul of the internal culture and risk management to execute a massive merger with a rival. And finally, his fourth curve, driving a total digital transformation of the bank.
He constantly destabilized his own success to build the next level. Dominic Barton, who is the global managing partner at McKinsey, used a visceral analogy for this in the text. He called it applying heart paddles to the organization.
It is a great visual. The natural entropy of any large organization is to slow down, to build bureaucracy, to become comfortable.
Right.
A leader has to periodically shock the system. They have to apply the defibrillator paddles with new, bold moves to keep the organizational heart beating vigorously.
Okay, so we have a reframed, co-created vision. We know we need to execute a series of bold S-curve moves to shock the system. But here is the elephant in the room. A vision is just an idea, and a strategy is just a PowerPoint deck until you actually fund it. If your capital, your top talent, and your attention are all tied up in last year's dying projects, your bold new S-curve is dead on arrival.
This is the ultimate bottleneck, and it brings us to the most difficult, bold move of all: resource allocation.
Yes.
To do this effectively, the leader has to cultivate a very uncomfortable psychological state. They must act like an outsider in their own company.
I want to spend some time on this because it is incredibly counterintuitive. Usually we value institutional knowledge. We want the insider who knows where the bodies are buried. Why is being an insider dangerous when it comes to allocating resources?
Because insiders are blinded by history and survival bias. To explain this, we have to talk about Abraham Wald.
This is one of my absolute favorite historical anecdotes. It perfectly crystallizes what it means to see the unseen data. Okay, let us go back to World War II.
Setting the scene again.
The Allied forces are taking heavy casualties in their bombing raids over Europe. They need to protect their planes.
The military brass, the ultimate insiders, gather data. They look at all the bombers returning from combat missions. They map out where the planes are riddled with bullet holes.
And the data is very clear. The vast majority of the bullet holes are concentrated in the fuselage, the wings, and the tail. So the generals look at this obvious visible data and make a logical conclusion. We need to put heavier armor on the fuselage, the wings, and the tail. That is where the enemy is hitting us.
If you are an insider, you look at the problem right in front of you and try to reinforce it.
But Abraham Wald was a mathematician from the Statistical Research Group at Columbia University. He was a civilian, an outsider. He looks at the exact same diagrams of the bullet-riddled planes, and he tells the generals they are completely wrong.
I imagine the generals thought he was insane.
I would have too. If I see a wing full of holes, I want to armor the wing.
But Wald understood what the insiders missed. He realized they were only looking at a biased sample, the planes that actually survived. The fact that a bomber could take 50 bullets to the wings and still manage to limp back to base meant that the wings did not actually need more armor. They were structurally sound enough to survive damage.
Wald asked the vital question, where are the missing bullet holes? The returning planes had almost no damage to the engines or the cockpit. Why? Because the planes that got hit in the engines or the cockpit did not come back. They were at the bottom of the English Channel.
Wald realized they needed to reinforce the untouched areas because hits to those areas were instantly fatal.
Seeing the missing planes, that is the essence of outsider thinking. Seeing past the obvious inherited wisdom, but applying that to corporate budgets, why is it so agonizingly hard to allocate money rationally? Why do smart executives act like the generals armoring the wrong parts of the plane?
Because of another deeply ingrained cognitive bias. Daniel Kahneman studied this extensively as well. It's called the anchor heuristic.
The Campbell's soup experiment. Okay, you are at the grocery store. Imagine 2 different supermarkets. Both have a massive end cap display of Campbell's soup on sale for 79 cents a can. A great deal.
But there is one subtle difference.
Yeah.
Store A has a small sign above the display that reads, "Limit 12 cans per customer." Store B has no limit sign at all.
So how many cans do people buy? In Store B, with no limit, the average shopper throws about 3 cans in their cart. That is a normal amount of soup for a family.
Right?
But in Store A, with the limit 12 sign, something weird happens. Shoppers buy an average of 7 cans.
The sign explicitly restricting them actually caused them to buy more than double the amount of soup. Why?
Because our brains are lazy. We rely on shortcuts. When the shopper in Store A sees the number 12, that number becomes a psychological anchor. Their brain subconsciously starts negotiating downward from 12. Well, I do not need 12, but maybe I will get 7.
And in Store B, the brain builds upward from 0. I need 0 soups. Maybe I will buy 3 just in case.
Now, take that exact same irrational brain chemistry and apply it to a multi-billion-dollar corporate budget cycle.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see it.
If a division leader had a budget of $100 million last year, that $100 million is their anchor. When they walk into the planning meeting for next year, they do not build their budget from scratch. They look at the anchor and ask for a 3% increase. They justify why they need $103 million.
And the CEO, suffering from the exact same anchor bias, pushes back and tries to negotiate them down to $99 million.
Exactly.
The entire multi-million-dollar debate is anchored to the past. It has nothing to do with the bold new S-curve they are supposed to be funding for the future.
Which is why the top 200 CEOs employ a brutal tool, zero-based budgeting. They refuse to accept last year's budget as an anchor.
So what do they do instead?
They tell their division heads, assume your budget is 0. Now justify every single dollar you are asking for based entirely on our new vision. Prove to me why this dollar deserves to exist today.
Mary Barra, at General Motors, is the poster child for this outsider ruthlessness. GM had been operating in certain international regions like Europe and India for decades.
Right. The regional presidents came to her during the budget cycle with their plans. We need hundreds of millions of dollars to develop new vehicle models for these markets.
And Barra looks at the long-term projections. She sees that even with the new investment, they are still going to struggle to break even, let alone dominate the market.
The argument from the regional leaders was classic insider thinking, anchored to the past. We have been in Europe forever. We are General Motors. We cannot just leave. If you do not give us the money to build new cars, we have nothing to sell. We will vanish.
But Barra channeled the outsider. She did not negotiate them down 5%. She quoted a board member who had told her, "There is nothing strategic about losing money." She looked at the zero base and realized that capital would generate massive returns if invested in electric vehicles or autonomous driving, and negative returns if poured into a stagnant European market.
Yeah.
She literally pulled GM out of regions they had inhabited for 20 years.
It was a massive shock to the system. But we have to acknowledge the human reality of this. Reallocating resources like that creates intense political friction.
Oh, massive friction.
When a CEO takes money and talent away from a historic division to fund a new S-curve, the leaders of the old division feel betrayed. They feel like their kingdoms are being plundered.
So how do you manage those bruised egos? Because if you anger all your top lieutenants, they will sabotage the new strategy.
You have to solve for the whole, and sometimes you need a brilliant analogy to reframe their perspective. Oliver Bett, the CEO of Allianz, the massive global insurance company, faced exactly this problem.
To free up capital, Bett realized he had to centralize a lot of duplicate functions across different countries. He needed a unified IT system, centralized HR, centralized procurement.
And the local country CEOs were furious. They were used to running their own fiefdoms. They felt Beatty was stripping away their power and reducing them to mere sales managers.
How did he convince them to surrender their kingdoms?
By using Formula One racing?
I am a huge F1 fan. Walk me through how he pitched this.
He sat down with these angry country managers and said, think of Allianz like the Mercedes Formula One racing team. You, the country manager, are Lewis Hamilton. You are the elite world champion driver. You get the glory on Sunday.
Okay.
But Lewis Hamilton does not design his own tires. He does not forge his own engine block in a shed. He does not build his own aerodynamics.
Exactly. Beatty said, the central corporate functions, the IT, the HR, the product design, we are the Mercedes engineering team. Our job is to build the absolute fastest, most reliable car in the world and hand you the keys.
Right.
Your job is not to build a car. Your job is to take the world-class platform we give you and drive it flawlessly to win in your specific local market.
That is brilliant. It completely neutralizes the ego threat. He is not taking their power away. He is taking their administrative burden away so they can focus on winning the race.
It is a masterclass in psychological reframing. But allocating resources is not just about moving money to the winners. It is equally about having the discipline to ruthlessly cut the losers.
Pruning the dead branches.
The data shows that the top CEOs prune their portfolios, cutting funding from failing or stagnant projects 3 times more often than average CEOs.
But human beings hate admitting defeat. How do you get a company to openly admit a project is dead?
You have to deliberately destigmatize failure. Look at Fike C. Besma at DSM, a Dutch multinational active in health, nutrition, and materials. He literally held formal funerals for failed projects.
He called it the Hall of Failures. It sounds a bit morbid, honestly.
It sounds morbid, but the psychological effect was incredibly liberating. By standing in front of the company and formally eulogizing a project that did not work out, he sent a crystal clear message. Taking a bold risk and failing is acceptable. What is unacceptable is hiding the failure and continuing to drain resources. We mourn it, we extract the learnings, and we officially close the budget so the money can be reallocated.
And it led to an incredible moment of serendipity that highlights why this is so important. They were holding a funeral for a multi-year, highly expensive project. The R&D team had been trying to create an anti-reflective coating for the glass used in picture frames.
Right, the underlying technology was brilliant. The coating literally pushed all the available photons straight through the glass without reflecting them back.
But the business model was a disaster. The process was way too expensive for the consumer art market. No one was going to pay a premium for slightly clearer picture frames. So the project was commercially dead.
They are holding the funeral, the scientists are giving the eulogy, explaining the photon-pushing technology they developed before shutting it down.
And sitting in the audience of this funeral is a technician from a completely different division of the company.
The solar energy division.
The technician hears, pushes all photons through the glass, and raises his hand. Wait, what if we took that exact same failed picture frame coating and sprayed it onto the glass of our solar panels?
It is the perfect connection.
The project was instantly resurrected. They applied the coating to their solar panels, boosted the energy efficiency by 5 to 10%, and created a massively profitable new global business line.
But let us be clear. That serendipity never happens if the picture frame team hides their failure out of shame.
Exactly.
It only happens because the CEO created an environment where closing dead projects and sharing the autopsy was celebrated.
Which is the perfect bridge to our next mindset. We've spent all this time talking about vision, S-curves, and reallocating capital. But Peter Drucker famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
It is so true. You can have the best zero-based budget in the world, but if the humans executing it have a defensive toxic mindset, the money just goes up in smoke. You have to rewire the humans, not just the spreadsheets.
This brings us to mindset 2. Treat the soft stuff as the hard stuff.
The soft stuff being culture, organizational design, and talent management.
In average companies, these are viewed as fuzzy, unquantifiable HR issues, the realm of trust falls and motivational posters.
Right.
The absolute best CEOs view them as rigorous, critical engineering problems. They treat human psychology with the exact same analytical rigor as they do a quarterly financial report.
The data supports this entirely. The odds of a company successfully executing a bold new strategy jump from about 30% to nearly 80% if the leader rigorously aligns the internal culture to match the new goals.
But changing human behavior at scale is incredibly difficult. Where do you even start?
You start by finding your fulcrum. You cannot change everything at once. If you hand your company a list of 20 new core values, you have changed nothing.
You just made a new poster.
Exactly. The best CEOs find the single high-leverage behavior, the one thing that, if changed, will force everything else to fall into place.
Paul O'Neill at Alcoa is the legendary benchmark for this. He takes over this massive global aluminum producer. The company is struggling financially, the workforce is demoralized, the union is combative.
Wall Street is demanding to hear his plan for improving profit margins and plant utilization. O'Neill stands up at his very first shareholder meeting in front of these aggressive investors.
And what does he say? He does not mention EBITDA. He does not mention revenue projections. He says, I want to talk to you about worker safety. I intend to make Alcoa the safest company in America. I intend to go for 0 injuries.
And the investors panicked. They literally ran to the payphones to sell the stock because they thought he was a naive, bleeding-heart hippie who was ignoring the financials.
But O'Neill understood the fulcrum. He knew he could not just order the company to be more efficient, but if he focused entirely maniacally on safety, what does that require?
It requires operational excellence. To prevent accidents involving molten aluminum, the machinery has to be perfectly maintained. The shifts have to be perfectly staffed. Most importantly, the communication between the floor workers and the executives has to be instantaneous and flawless.
By focusing only on safety, the one thing everyone could agree was morally right, he forced the organization to build habits of absolute excellence.
And those habits accidentally drove record profits. Within a year, Alcoa's profits hit a record high.
Yeah.
By the time he retired, net income was up fivefold.
We see this extreme focus on a single cultural fulcrum everywhere in the data. Satya Nadella taking over Microsoft. He did not issue 20 new edicts. He boiled a massive cultural turnaround down to a single concept, moving the company from a culture of know-it-alls to a culture of learn-it-alls. He instilled a growth mindset.
But defining the one thing is just the start. A leader talking about safety or a growth mindset does not actually change behavior on a Tuesday afternoon.
No, behavior is a product of the environment. If you want people to act differently, you have to forcefully reshape the environment they operate in. You have to change the formal mechanisms of the company.
Let us talk about Masahiko Uotani at Shiseido, the Japanese cosmetics giant. He was the first outsider CEO in their 142-year history. He knew the company had to become globally competitive to survive, but the internal culture was incredibly insular and Japan-centric.
He needed the culture to look outward, so he made a radical environmental change. He declared that English was the official language of the Tokyo headquarters.
Oh man, I can only imagine the resistance. You have executives who have worked there for 30 years, operating in Japanese, and suddenly the new guy says all official meetings and documents must be in English.
The resistance from middle management was massive. They argued it would slow them down, that it was disrespectful to their heritage.
How did he push through that?
He held firm on the mandate, explaining that to integrate the best global talent, they needed a hybrid, accessible culture. But he did not just swing a hammer, he provided the tools.
Right.
He offered free, intensive English lessons to anyone who wanted them. Over 3,000 employees took him up on it. By changing the environment, he forced the organization to build the muscle of global communication.
Okay, I follow the logic. But I can hear a skeptical listener right now saying, this still feels squishy. Safety records and language proficiency are one thing, but how do you measure something abstract like growth mindset or accountability?
Right.
How do you know if the culture is actually working or if measuring it is just a vanity exercise for HR?
It is the most common objection, but remember the mandate. Treat the soft stuff as the hard stuff. Hard stuff gets measured and penalized. The best CEOs refuse to accept that culture is unmeasurable. There's a great quote often attributed to Einstein. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
So how do they force culture to be counted?
Let us look at Johan Thijs, the CEO of KBC, the massive Belgian bank insurance group. He wanted to drive a culture of agility and accountability. He established a behavioral framework called PEARL.
Pearl. Performance, empowerment, accountability, responsiveness, and local embeddedness. Okay, sounds like standard corporate jargon on a mouse pad.
It would be, except Thijs turned it into a weaponized scorecard.
Explain how that works.
If you are an employee at KBC and you apply for a promotion into management, your financial performance is only half the equation. You also have to pass a rigorous external screening evaluating you strictly on those Pearl cultural metrics.
Wait, hold on. Let us play this out. Imagine I am your top rainmaker. I am a trading prodigy. I bring in $50 million in pure profit to the bank every single year.
Okay.
But I am a bit of a jerk. Do not collaborate well, I hoard information, and I am rude to my juniors. I apply for managing director. What happens?
If you fail the culture test, Johan Thijs literally blocks your promotion.
The CEO will block the $50 million rainmaker.
Yes, because Thijs understands the long-term math. You might bring in $50 million today, but your toxic behavior destroys the empowerment and responsiveness of the 10 people working under you. You are costing the bank $100 million in lost future value.
Wow.
At KBC, if you do not pass the culture screen, you do not get promoted. Period.
That is how you treat the soft stuff as the hard stuff. You tie the fuzzy cultural words directly to career advancement and compensation. Suddenly, being a team player has very hard financial consequences.
Exactly. But you can have the best, most accountable culture in the world It still needs a physical structure to live in. If the culture is the operating system, the organizational design is the hardware.
Which brings us to the concept of solving for stagility.
Stagility. It is a portmanteau.
Yeah.
Stability plus agility.
It sounds like a buzzword, but the metaphor the source text uses clarifies it perfectly. Think about architecture. Think about the very first early skyscrapers.
Right.
When engineers first started building really tall buildings, they built them to be incredibly rigid, massive walls of solid stone and steel.
But as they built higher, they realized rigidity was a fatal flaw. The wind forces at the top of a 100-story building are immense. If a rigid building cannot bend, the wind will literally snap it in half.
Right, so modern architects completely changed the design. They build super tall skyscrapers to sway. They have a massive, incredibly stable concrete core housing the elevators, but the outer structures incorporate flexible materials and massive tuned mass dampers.
A building like the Burj Khalifa might sway several feet in high winds.
Its ultimate strength is derived entirely from its flexibility.
The researchers argue that a modern company must be built the exact same way. It needs a stable, unshakable backbone to handle massive scale and compliance, but it must be agile enough to sway with market disruptions without snapping. Stagility.
The problem is that most average leaders do not know how to build a swaying skyscraper. They ride a pendulum instead.
They violently swing the entire organization between two extremes, total centralization or total decentralization.
Let us look at the extremes. Percy Barnevik at ABB in the 1990s.
Barnevik wanted ultimate entrepreneurial agility, so he radically decentralized the massive engineering firm. He broke it into 5,000 completely separate, autonomous profit centers.
5,000. That sounds like pure, unadulterated chaos.
It was absolute chaos. It maximized local agility, but destroyed stability. At one point, because every unit bought their own software, they had 576 different systems for purchasing and 60 different payroll systems. The duplication of effort and internal turf wars were disastrous.
Yeah, the pendulum swings the other way. Terry Samel takes over Yahoo and wants to regain control and efficiency.
He centralizes everything. He collapses 44 diverse business units into just 4 massive, centrally controlled groups.
This has built a rigid stone skyscraper. And what happened?
Yahoo! Ground to an agonizing halt. The centralized bureaucracy became suffocating. Every decision required 6 layers of approval. While they were filling out forms, they got lapped by Google and completely missed the mobile revolution. They snapped in the wind.
So the best CEOs stop the pendulum. They do not ask, should we be centralized or decentralized? They ask a much more surgical question: what specific foundational functions create the most value by being centralized, and what specific functions absolutely must be kept local and agile to serve the customer?
But when you try to blend central efficiency with local agility, you almost always end up creating a matrix organization. And anyone who has worked in a large corporation knows that the matrix is where human productivity goes to die.
Oh, the matrix is a nightmare. For the listener who has not suffered through one, a matrix usually means dotted line reporting. You have your local project boss, but you also report on a dotted line to some corporate functional boss in another country.
It is the equivalent of having 2 different people fighting over the steering wheel of a car.
Exactly. I am sitting in the driver's seat. Boss A is yelling, turn left to hit our local sales target. Boss B is yelling, no, turn right to comply with the new global corporate synergy initiative.
What do?
I freeze. I hit the brakes. The matrix creates total gridlock and endless political meetings just to decide who gets to turn the wheel.
Which is why the top 200 CEOs do not build a matrix, they build a helix.
The DNA helix model.
Yeah.
This might be the most practical structural takeaway in the entire study. How does it differ from the matrix?
Picture a strand of DNA. The 2 spirals intertwine. They are deeply connected, but they run parallel. They never actually cross over and block each other.
Okay, translating that to an org chart.
In a corporate helix, it is not a dotted line, it is a split hard line. An employee still has 2 bosses, but those bosses have completely different, totally non-overlapping mandates.
Walk me through a real example. I am a software engineer. Who are my 2 bosses?
One boss manages the what you do day to day. This is your value creation manager. Maybe it is the product lead for the new mobile app. They assign your daily tasks, they set the sprint goals, and they ensure you are building what the customer needs right now.
And the second boss?
The second boss manages the how. This is your capabilities manager. Maybe it is the head of engineering. They do not care about the mobile app's daily progress. They are responsible for how you do the work. They manage your hiring, your long-term training, your salary, and your career progression within the company.
I see. The territories are completely distinct. The what boss does not waste time worrying about my annual training budget or doing my performance review. And the how boss does not try to micromanage my daily coding tasks.
Exactly. It eliminates the fight over the steering wheel. The product lead drives the car. The engineering lead makes sure the driver is highly trained and well compensated.
But restructuring a massive company from a tangled matrix into a clean helix requires an agonizing amount of work. The source material makes an analogy to the movie The Matrix, the choice between the blue pill and the red pill.
It is a very apt metaphor. A lot of average CEOs take the blue pill. They recognize the organization is sluggish, so they announce a reorganization. But all they actually do is shuffle the boxes on the org chart.
Right, they just change people's titles.
Exactly. It creates a flurry of activity and the illusion of progress, but the underlying power dynamics, the fights over the steering wheel, remain exactly the same.
It is safe, it looks good to the board, but it solves nothing.
Taking the red pill means doing the agonizing, deeply political work of deciding exactly what parts of the company are the permanent, stable operating system, the concrete core of the skyscraper, and what parts are the agile, temporary apps that can be spun up and shut down as needed.
We talked about Johan Tyus at KBC earlier with the Pearl scorecard. He has a brilliant example of deploying a temporary agile app.
KBC needed to build a world-class mobile banking app to compete with fintech startups.
Now, if Tyus ran that project through the normal, stable banking bureaucracy, the concrete core, what happens?
It takes 3 years, it requires 1,000 compliance signatures, and by the time it launches, the technology is obsolete.
So he took the red pill. He carved out a team and isolated them from the bureaucracy. He gave them €1,000,000 and said, "You have exactly 6 months. Forget the traditional hierarchy. Pull whoever you need from across the company. Work in agile sprints, and I will personally keep the management committee off your back."
He created a highly agile, temporary speedboat to detach from the stable tanker ship, and they delivered an award-winning app in less than 6 months. That is true stagility in action. The bank remained stable, but the project flew.
Okay. We have the culture defined. We have a stagility-based helix organizational structure built. The skyscraper is ready. Now we need to put people in the building. We need to fill the boxes on that org chart. This brings us to talent management. And the primary rule the researchers found here is going to make a lot of HR professionals deeply uncomfortable.
The rule is, don't put people first.
It sounds incredibly callous. We spent all this time talking about culture and growth mindset. And now we are saying, do not put people first.
It sounds cold, but it is actually the most intellectually honest and effective way to build a high-performing team. You have to start with the role, not the individual.
The analogy they use here is the U.S. Navy SEALs.
When the SEALs are recruiting, they do not just go out looking for the best athletes. They do not look for the fastest marathon runner or the strongest power lifter and say, "Wow, you are amazing. Let us figure out a way to use you."
They define the absolute requirements of the role first. And the primary, non-negotiable requirement for a SEAL is a resolute mind that will never, ever quit, regardless of extreme physical suffering and chaos.
So they designed their selection process, Hell Week, specifically to test for that one attribute. They do not care if you hold an Olympic medal in swimming. If you ring the bell and quit when you are freezing, exhausted, and covered in sand, you are not a fit for the role.
Corporate leaders almost always do the opposite. They look around their executive team, they identify their top 5 favorite, most loyal executives, and they try to draw the organizational chart to accommodate those specific people. They mold the roles to fit the talent they already have.
Which is a recipe for catastrophic failure when the strategy changes. The best CEOs map out the strategy, and then they rigorously define the 30 to 50 roles that will create the absolute most value in the company, completely blind to the current hierarchy or who currently occupies the seats.
And this process of defining the critical roles first leads to the discovery of left tackles.
Back to sports analogies. American football.
I love this one because it is so visibly true. In football, everyone knows the quarterback is the star. The quarterback touches the ball every play, throws the touchdowns, gets the endorsements, and dates the supermodels. But if you look at the payroll of a championship team, who is the second highest paid player on the roster, it is almost never the running back or the star wide receiver.
It is the left tackle.
A massive 300-pound lineman who never touches the football, never scores a point, and is rarely mentioned by the announcers. Why does he make $20 million a year?
Because the left tackle's only job is to protect the quarterback's blind side from a defensive end trying to break his collarbone. If the left tackle fails, the quarterback goes to the hospital, the offense collapses, and the team loses.
In business, CEOs are usually very good at identifying their quarterbacks. They know who the division heads are that drive massive revenue and get their names in the trade press, but they're often terrible at identifying their left tackles, the unglamorous roles that prevent the strategy from imploding.
Let us look at Siam Cement Group in Thailand. For decades, the most important roles in the company were defined by traditional hierarchy. How many people reported to you or how massive your operational budget was. The research and development department was viewed as a quiet, irrelevant backwater.
But then a new CEO, Kan Trakulhun, takes over. He sets a bold new vision. He realizes they cannot compete on cheap commodity cement anymore. The strategy pivots to creating premium, high-margin, innovative building materials.
Suddenly, the entire future of the company rests on inventing products that do not exist yet.
Overnight, the head of R&D, the backwater, becomes the most important left tackle in the entire corporation. If R&D fails to innovate, the premium strategy is a hallucination, and the company dies.
Truckelhoon had to completely elevate that role. He could not just leave a competent middle manager in that seat. He needed an absolute superstar.
Multiple CEOs in the study also pointed out a more universal left tackle. They argued that the chief financial officer is often the ultimate left tackle in the C-suite. A brilliant strategic CFO protects the CEO's blind side on capital allocation, regulatory risk, and market messaging, freeing the CEO up to be the visionary quarterback.
But this approach, defining the role analytically and treating talent like puzzle pieces to fit those roles, brings up a very painful reality.
Loyalty.
Yes. What happens to the executive who has been with the company for 20 years? They are fiercely loyal, they work 80 hours a week, but the strategy's changed, and they simply do not have the skills to play left tackle in the new S-curve.
Does not replacing them destroy the fabric of loyalty in the company?
The expert consensus from these 200 leaders is that loyalty to an individual is actually a dangerous trap. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, has a brutal but incredibly necessary perspective on this. When an executive comes to him and pledges their personal loyalty, he literally stops them and says, "Please do not."
Your loyalty is not to me. Your loyalty is to the institution and to the customer.
Dimon argues that keeping a loyal, well-meaning but underperforming person in a critical, high-value role is not an act of kindness. It is a massive act of disloyalty to the thousands of other employees in the company and to the clients who rely on them. You are jeopardizing the stability of the entire enterprise just to spare one person's feelings.
That requires an immense amount of courage to execute. But this cold, role-first approach has a massive upside as well. When you strip away the titles and define the exact cognitive skills a role requires, it allows you to uncover the unusual suspects.
You realize that the best candidate for the job is not always the obvious next in line. Shantanu Narayan at Adobe is a fantastic example of finding an unusual suspect.
Adobe was going through a massive transformation, moving from selling shrink-wrap software boxes to a cloud-based subscription model. Narayan needed a new head of human resources to manage the incredible internal turbulence this shift was causing.
The standard playbook says you look at the org chart and promote the VP of HR, or you hire a career HR executive from another tech company.
But Narayan had defined the role differently. He did not just need someone to manage payroll and benefits. He needed a left tackle who deeply understood the intricate technical aspects of the new corporate strategy, someone he implicitly trusted as a sparring partner, and someone with the gravitas to aggressively push back against the engineering leaders.
So who did he pick?
He picked his own chief of staff, Gloria Chen.
What is her background?
She had risen through sales, operations, and corporate strategy. She had an engineering degree. She had absolutely zero background in traditional human resources.
But she perfectly matched the specific strategic attributes he had defined for the role.
She was the exact right puzzle piece for that specific hole. She stepped in and successfully managed the human capital side of one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in tech history.
Okay, so we have identified the critical roles, and we have placed our unusual suspects and left tackles into those seats. But putting a collection of highly paid, alpha personality superstars in a boardroom does not automatically make them a team.
In fact, it usually makes them a nightmare, which is why we move to the final mindset. You have the structure, you have the talent, now you must solve for the team psychology.
This is where the researchers use my favorite analogy in the entire study, the ecosystem of an old-growth forest.
It is such a powerful visual. If you walk into an ancient forest, say the redwoods, or a dense mix of oaks, maples, and firs, what do you see above ground? It looks like a brutal zero-sum competition.
You see giant trees racing toward the sky, trying to outgrow each other to steal the sunlight. It looks like nature's version of a cutthroat corporate sales floor.
But biologists have discovered that what happens underground is completely different. The roots of all those different species of trees are intricately connected by a massive microscopic fungal network called mycorrhiza.
They are not just touching, they are actively communicating and sharing resources.
Right. If a fir tree is growing in the shade and starving for light, an oak tree out in the sun will literally pump excess carbon and sugar down into the fungal network to feed the fir tree. In return, the fir tree might share nitrogen or water it pulls from deeper soil. They act as a single, cooperative, interdependent ecosystem. They keep the weakest trees alive to maintain the integrity of the whole canopy against the wind.
The researchers point out the danger of ignoring this. If a logging company comes in, clear cuts that diverse forest and replants it with a monoculture, say just one all-star species of Douglas fir planted in neat competitive rows, the forest actually fails. Without the diversity of species and the cooperative underground network, the trees are brittle. A single disease or a strong storm can wipe out the entire plantation.
Corporate leadership teams operate on the exact same biological principle. You cannot just hire 10 superstar Douglas fir executives, put them in a room, pit them against each other for the CEO's job, and expect them to thrive. You need diverse talents that cooperate underground.
Cultivating that mycorrhizal network of trust and cooperation is the CEO's ultimate responsibility. But what happens when the soil is toxic? What happens when you have executives who refuse to cooperate, who actively hoard resources, or who are quietly sabotaging the new S-curve strategy?
This is where the leader has to act fast but fair. Lilach Asher-Topilsky, the former CEO of Israel Discount Bank, faced this exact crisis.
She took over a legacy bank that urgently needed to modernize. She mapped out 30 massive digital and operational initiatives that had to be executed flawlessly.
But she looked around her executive boardroom and realized a terrifying truth. Many of the veteran leaders sitting at the table simply did not believe in the digital transformation. They thought it was a fad. They were dragging their feet.
You cannot execute a war strategy if the generals leading the charge think the war is a mistake.
So she took radical action. Over her first few years, she replaced half of her top management team. Half of the most powerful people in the bank, gone, including the head of HR.
From the outside, replacing half your executive team sounds like a ruthless, paranoid corporate purge.
But it was not arbitrary. The rule the best CEOs follow is fast but fair. You do not fire people on a whim. Before a top CEO removes a senior executive, they force themselves to answer 4 critical questions to ensure they are being objectively fair.
Let us walk through the 4 questions, because this is a framework anyone managing people should memorize. Question 1. Does the individual know exactly what is expected of them?
Is the agenda perfectly clear? Have I communicated the new strategy, or am I just assuming they get it? Question 2, have they been given the necessary tools and resources to succeed?
You cannot fire an executive for failing to build a digital app if you starve their IT budget. You have to give them the hammer if you want them to build a house. Question 3, are they surrounded by aligned peers?
This is the ecosystem question. Are the people around them supporting the change? Or is the surrounding environment so toxic that no one could possibly succeed? And finally, question 4, do they fully understand the consequences of failing to get on board?
Have you had the hard, direct conversation? If the CEO can look in the mirror and honestly answer yes to all 4 of those questions,
The expectations are clear, the tools are there, the environment is supportive, and they know the stakes.
and the executive is still failing or resisting the strategy, then you have no choice. You must remove them, and you must do it quickly. Letting a toxic resistor stay on the team poisons the entire underground fungal network. The high performers will lose faith in you if they see you tolerating sabotage.
But managing the psychology of a team is not just a clinical process of firing people. It is a deeply human endeavor. It requires maintaining a very delicate balance between intimacy and authority. The researchers call this distance and connection.
It is a psychological tightrope that every leader has to walk. On one hand, you have to forge deep, genuine connections. Look at Gail Kelly, the former CEO of Westpac in Australia. She was famous for calling her top executives every single week, often while they were commuting.
But she was not calling for a status update on the quarterly numbers.
No, she was just chatting. She wanted to know what they were worried about. She wanted to know how their spouses and kids were doing. She deliberately made herself vulnerable so they would share their vulnerabilities with her. She built intense personal connections so she could support them as humans.
But on the exact opposite side of that tightrope, you have leaders like Casper Roosted, who led Adidas. He explicitly stated a rule that sounds incredibly cold. He said, I want to be friendly, but I do not want to make friends.
Why would a leader say that? Why deny yourself friendship at work?
Because the CEO is the ultimate arbiter.
Hmm.
Roosted recognized a fatal flaw in human psychology. If he became too close, too emotionally entwined, or vacationed with his top executives, he might hesitate when the time came to make an unbiased, brutal choice.
If the left tackle stops blocking and the left tackle is your best friend, you will hesitate to bench them. And that hesitation could cost the entire company.
It is the ultimate burden of the crown. You have to care deeply about the people in your care, but you must remain detached enough to cut them loose if the survival of the institution requires it. You have to be close enough to build the ecosystem, but distant enough to prune it.
It requires an immense amount of emotional intelligence and self-awareness to navigate that paradox every single day for 10 years.
Which is exactly why these 200 leaders are so incredibly rare and why they generate trillions of dollars in value. So let us take a breath and try to synthesize this entire massive journey we've been on.
We started with the realization that the CEO effect is real and measurable, a $5 trillion impact from just 200 individuals.
And we learned that their secret recipe is not a morning routine or a specific software tool. It is a shared set of cognitive mindsets that allow them to navigate chaos. First, they beamed at it. Be bold. They refused to play defense. They reframed the entire game, like Mandela with the rugby team or Ajay Banga declaring war on cash. They co-create the vision so their teams own the lottery ticket.
They execute massive S-curve moves to continually shock the organizational heart, and crucially, they allocate resources like an outsider. They look for the missing bullet holes like Abraham Wald, and they ruthlessly zero-base their budgets, funding the future instead of anchoring to the past.
Second, they treat the soft stuff as hard stuff. They do not rely on motivational posters. They find their cultural one thing. They reshape the environment to force behavior change, and they measure culture with hard, punitive metrics like KBC's Pearl scorecard.
They build a stagility-based organization, a skyscraper that sways. They avoid the gridlock of the matrix by building a clean helix structure with split hard lines, and they have the courage to take the red pill and reorganize the actual power dynamics.
And finally, they solve for the team's psychology. They ignore the current org chart and define the critical left tackle roles first. They seek out unusual suspects, and they cultivate a mycorrhizal ecosystem of cooperative talent, acting fast but fair when they need to prune toxic resistors.
It is a phenomenal interlocking masterclass in managing human complexity.
And as we wrap up, I want to bring this right back to you, the listener, because as we said at the top of the hour, you do not need to be running a massive global bank to use this operating system. Whether you manage an entire division of 40,000 people, you manage a local bakery, or you're just managing your own time as a solopreneur, the requirement to act like an outsider in your own life remains exactly the same.
The biases we talked about, the anchor heuristic, the sunk cost fallacy, the fear of pruning dead projects, they affect your personal budget and your personal relationships just as much as they affect General Motors.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you to take away and chew on. I want you to think about the ultimate resource allocation, your own time, your own calendar.
Time is the one asset that zero bases itself every single day. You cannot buy more, and you cannot save it for tomorrow.
Exactly. But think about how we usually plan our weeks. We operate exactly like those defensive average corporate managers. We take last week's schedule as an anchor. We look at all the recurring meetings, the habits, the obligations we said yes to 3 years ago, and we just accept them as a given. And then we try to frantically squeeze our new, important, bold goals into the tiny, exhausted gaps that are left over. We are asking for a 2% budget increase based on last year's calendar.
We let history dictate our future. We armor the parts of our day that are already full of holes.
But what if you applied a ruthless, outsider, zero-based mindset to your own life? I challenge you to try this exercise tonight. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and your calendar was completely 100% blank. Zero. If you had to justify every single hour of your week from scratch based only on your current goals and your reframed vision for your future, which habits, which recurring meetings, and which commitments would you actually choose to fund with your limited hours?
And the painful, necessary corollary. If you would not actively choose to invest in those commitments from scratch today, why on earth are they still sitting on your calendar?
What are the dead projects you need to hold a funeral for? Think about those three master navigators at the leadership retreat in St. Michael's, with their compasses spinning. If you do not zero base your own life, you will spend your days running in three different directions based on old anchors and other people's expectations. You have to be bold enough to recalibrate your own compass to your true north and prune everything else away.
Find your one thing, build your helix, protect your left tackles.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some heart paddles for your own S-curve. Stay curious, stay bold, and we will see you next time.